The war in Sudan and why the world isn't watching. Look at this, a country collapsing in real time, cities turned into battlefields, Yamali people running for their lives. But somehow, you barely hear about it. No constant breaking news, no global outrage, no endless headlines, just silence. And that silence might be one of the most dangerous parts of Sudan's war. Because while the world looks elsewhere, Sudan is facing one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern history. The war began on April 15, 2023. Two powerful forces, the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces, turned against each other. What started as a power struggle quickly became a nationwide catastrophe. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. Hospitals stopped functioning. Food supplies collapsed. Millions were displaced. Millions more now face hunger. Some estimates suggest hundreds of thousands of deaths. Yet somehow, this war remains largely invisible. So the question is, why? Why is one of the biggest crises in the world receiving so little attention? The answer begins inside Sudan itself, with the collapse of its media. When war broke out, it didn't just destroy homes. It destroyed the systems that tell the world what's happening. Newspapers shut down, printing presses were looted, TV stations were attacked. Journalists were forced to flee or risk being killed. Some continued reporting, but under unimaginable conditions. No electricity, no stable internet, constant fear of violence. More than 30 journalists have been killed since the war began. Others have been threatened, kidnapped, or tortured. Imagine trying to report the truth while being hunted for it. And yet, many still do. Because without them, the war becomes completely invisible. But even when journalists risk everything to report, their voices often don't reach the world. Why? Because Sudan's information space has turned into a battlefield of its own. Not just a war of bullets, but a war of narratives. A recent 2026 report revealed something alarming. Disinformation is not just a byproduct of this war. It is part of the strategy. False stories, manipulated videos, hate speech, all designed to confuse, divide, and control. On social media, both sides flood platforms with their own versions of reality. One side claims victory, the other denies it. Civilians are labeled as enemies. Communities are dehumanized. And in many cases, online lies are followed by real-world violence. Because when people are convinced someone is the enemy, violence becomes easier to justify. Even more disturbing, these campaigns are becoming more advanced. Coordinated networks, algorithm manipulation, even AI-generated content. And it doesn't stop at Sudan's borders. Regional media ecosystems and foreign actors amplify these narratives, turning confusion into chaos. So while the world sees very little information, what actually exists is too much information, most of it unreliable. And that creates a dangerous paradox. Because when truth becomes hard to find, people stop trusting everything, including real journalism. Inside Sudan, many people now rely on social media as their primary news source. But social media is also where misinformation spreads the fastest. And with internet outages happening frequently, even that access isn't guaranteed. At times, entire regions go silent. No updates, no communication, just uncertainty. Now imagine being in a war where you don't even know what's happening outside your street. This is the reality for millions of Sudanese. Meanwhile, traditional media struggles to survive. Radio stations and TV networks became direct targets. On the very first day of the conflict, the National Broadcasting Headquarters was seized. It wasn't just a military move, it was a message. Control the media, control the narrative. Both sides understood this. The army used official channels to push its message. The Rapid Support Forces focused heavily on social media. Fast, aggressive, constant. They filled the gap left by collapsing traditional media. And they did it effectively. In many cases, their online presence appeared stronger than their actual presence on the ground. They live-streamed battles, shared footage instantly, spread messages designed to influence perception. This wasn't accidental. It was psychological warfare. Because in modern conflict, winning the story can be just as important as winning the fight. And Sudan became a perfect example of that shift. But even beyond Sudan's borders, another problem exists: global media priorities. News coverage isn't just about what's happening, it's about what gets attention. Wars in places like Ukraine and Gaza dominate headlines, not because Sudan is less severe, but because global interest is uneven. Strategic importance, political alliances, audience demand, all influence what gets covered. And Sudan falls into what experts call a visibility gap. It exists in a space where suffering is massive, but attention is minimal. One official described it as the biggest disconnect they had ever seen between the scale of a crisis and the level of media coverage. Think about that. One of the worst humanitarian disasters in the world, barely making headlines. And there's another factor: the decline of global journalism itself. News organizations are shrinking, budgets are tightening, foreign bureaus are closing. Sending reporters into dangerous conflict zones is expensive and risky. Sudan is both. Access is limited, visas are difficult to obtain, travel is dangerous. Many journalists simply cannot get in. Those who do often have to embed with military forces, which limits what they can report. So even when coverage happens, it's incomplete, and that creates a cycle. Less access leads to less coverage. Less coverage leads to less awareness. Less awareness leads to less pressure for action. And the crisis continues, largely unnoticed. But despite all of this, Sudanese journalists refuse to disappear. Some operate from exile. Others report from inside the country. Many have lost everything, yet continue to document the war. They analyze videos, verify information, piece together stories from fragments, because they know something critical. If they stop, the world may never know the truth. Independent media initiatives have emerged to fight back. Collaborations between journalists, fact-checking networks, digital investigations, all trying to cut through the noise of disinformation. But it's an uphill battle, because misinformation spreads faster than truth, and fear spreads faster than facts. Still, they continue, because journalism in Sudan right now is not just a profession, it's resistance. And yet, even with their efforts, many Sudanese journalists feel abandoned. They risk their lives to report, but their stories rarely reach global audiences. It's like shouting into a void. One group of journalists even wrote a public letter calling for international support. They asked the world to pay attention, to listen, to care, because without that, their work might not be enough. And here's the uncomfortable truth: media coverage matters, not just for awareness, but for action. When the world watches, pressure builds. Governments respond, aid increases, diplomatic efforts intensify. But when the world looks away, crises deepen, violence escalates, and accountability disappears. That's what's happening in Sudan. A war unfolding in the shadows, not because it's hidden, but because it's ignored. So the issue isn't just the war itself, it's the silence around it. A silence created by collapsing media, disinformation, global priorities, and limited access. A silence that allows suffering to continue without interruption. But here's the thing: silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means not enough people are paying attention, and that's a dangerous place for any crisis to be. Because history has shown us, the worst atrocities often happen when the world isn't watching. Sudan is not just a story about conflict, it's a story about information, about who controls it, who spreads it, and who gets to hear it. It's a reminder that in today's world, war is fought on two fronts: the battlefield and the narrative. And right now, Sudan is losing both. So the next time you scroll through headlines and don't see Sudan, remember this. Absence of coverage doesn't mean absence of crisis. It might mean the opposite, that something so massive is happening, but it's being drowned out, ignored, or deliberately hidden. And the question we're left with is simple. If one of the world's greatest humanitarian crises can go this unnoticed, what else are we not seeing? And more importantly, what happens if we keep looking away?